Joining us right now to talk more about the impact of both these agreements, let's welcome Tom Vilsack. He is president and CEO of the U.S. Dairy Export Council. He also served as agriculture secretary in the Obama administration, and he's a two-term governor from Iowa. Secretary, thank you for being here today. You served in the Obama administration, but you had very positive words about what happened with USMCA. Your comments on this, what do you think about this trade deal?
Well, it's certainly good news for the dairy industry. It's going to give us an opportunity, if this agreement is implemented in the way we intend it to be implemented, market access to Canada that we haven't had. It's going to end a classing system for powder that has depressed world prices and made it very difficult for our dairy farmers to be profitable. So a good agreement, opportunities for us to maintain our market in Mexico, which is the #1 market for dairy, and a way of protecting against the European Union monopolizing certain cheese names with geographic indications, a due process system that's put in place in Mexico. So all in all, a good agreement for dairy, certainly a good agreement potentially for agriculture as well. Maintaining primarily the status quo, wheat and dairy, I think, are two big winners in this USMCA.
You know, just to back it up a little bit for people who don't follow the dairy industry quite as closely, what have been the problems that have been pressuring American farmers when it comes to dairy?
Well, the Canadians have a supply management system, and in theory, they should be managing their problems with supply within the borders of Canada. But they had an excess of powder, which they then began to export at well below world prices, causing
what is the powder? I'm sorry. Powder is just what's used to make milk?
It is a byproduct. Well, it's a byproduct of cheese. It's a byproduct of butter. It's what's left, if you will, after you've made butter or cheese, that type of thing. And it is a significant commodity for U.S. dairy. We export about 75 to 80% of the powder that's produced in this country gets exported. So anytime prices are depressed, especially artificially, it creates problems for dairy farmers and processors.
If it's a byproduct, what does it get used for?
Well, it gets placed in a variety of baked goods, a series of ingredients that's used by the pharmaceutical industry as a filler for pills, dilutes the impact of medications, things of that nature.
There was a commentary that came from Senator Pat Toomeys of Pennsylvania. He put out a statement yesterday saying that outside of a few modest modernizations and modest market access improvements for Pennsylvania's dairy farmers, USMCA is a step backwards, and I could not support its passage. What do you make of his comments?
Well, I respectfully disagree with the senators, especially as it relates to dairy. The elimination of this Class 7 pricing system is a very large deal for U.S. dairy. We anticipate and expect that once this agreement is fully implemented and the quotas are put in place, we're going to see $200 to $300 million of additional business opportunity for dairy farmers at a time where we've seen depressed prices for 3 or 4 years for dairy farmers. This is good news, along with the Chinese agreement. If, in fact, it's carried through and the Chinese follow through with the promises they've made, there are opportunities as well for additional market access in that agreement.
Outside of dairy farmers, what does it mean for agriculture on a broader base?
Well, I think that the Chinese agreement, obviously, if the Chinese actually follow through and purchase $40 to $50 billion of agricultural products, that's obviously going to strengthen and stabilize farm income and prices. The key here, I think, is implementation. The key here is making sure that the Chinese follow through with their promises. They're famous for promising. They're not as famous for following through with a promise.
In terms of keeping promises and trying to keep this under control, we've passed USMCA. Mexico has already passed and approved it, but Canada has not yet. The Prime Minister there has been under pretty considerable political pressure and has pledged to actually compensate the dairy farmers in his country who are facing more competition. What would that mean to you?
Well, I think Canada is going to ratify this agreement. I don't think there's any question about that. And it's important that they ratify it soon. There's a 6-month window in which they have to eliminate this Class 7 pricing system, and so we want to get that done as quickly as possible so that we restore some sense of fairness to the powder market. So I expect it's going to be ratified. Clearly, the Canadian dairy industry is a powerful political interest in Canada. The reality is they benefit from a supply management system. Consumers in Canada don't necessarily benefit. They see much higher prices for milk and for dairy products.
In terms of making sure that we are enforcing this, and when it comes to the China agreement, switching lanes again, watching to make sure that they're making those agricultural purchases that they've promised, how soon will we be able to tell? When will we be able to really check? Is this a 2-month process, a 6-month process, a 1-year process, or beyond?
I think we'll have a good sense of this in the latter part of 2020, early 2021. Industry is going to have to continue to report into the U.S. government. I think certainly it's important that the U.S. government is setting up its own separate office within the Trade Representative's office for implementation to review and make sure that the conditions of this agreement are following through. Under this agreement, either party can leave at any point in time after giving notice. So it is important that we monitor performance. It is important that we get these purchases made by the Chinese. We'll see what they purchase and how much over the course of the next 6 to 9 months, and you have a good sense of whether or not this is an agreement that really will, in the long term, benefit U.S. agriculture.